When they had reached the designated height, Garbett handed over the controls to Foster. He turned to look at the passenger. The man had turned up his overcoat collar and pulled his hat even further down. Garbett wondered if he was asleep, but something told him that the man was wide awake. The landing at Buckeburg went smoothly, despite the fact that it was dark and the lighting dim. A car guided the aircraft to the edge of the long operations building. Several military vehicles were already standing by. Garbett prepared to help the passenger off the plane, but when he reached for the suitcase, the man insisted on taking it himself. He got into one of the cars, and the convoy drove off immediately. Whiffen and Foster had clambered to the ground and watched the rear lights fade away. It was cold, and they were shivering. "Makes you wonder what's going on," Whiffen said. "Best not to ask," Garbett said. He pointed to a jeep approaching the aircraft. "We're putting up at a base near here," he said. "I assume that's our car." After they'd been allocated their quarters and had their evening meal, some of the mechanics suggested they go into town for a beer in one of the bars that had survived the bombing. Whiffen and Foster agreed at once, but Garbett felt tired and stayed in camp. He had trouble getting to sleep, and lay awake wondering who their passenger was. What was in that suitcase he hadn't let anybody else touch? The passenger must be on some secret mission. All Garbett had to do was to fly him back home the following day. The rest was not his concern. He looked at his watch. Midnight already. He adjusted his pillow, and when Whiffen and Foster got back around 1 a.m., he was fast asleep. Donald Davenport left the British prison for German war criminals soon after 11 p.m. He had a room in a hotel that served as a base for British officers stationed in Hamelin. He needed some sleep if he were going to carry out his duties efficiently the following day. He was a little uneasy about Officer McManaman, his nominated assistant. Davenport disliked working with people unused to the job. All manner of things could go wrong, especially when the assignment was as big as the one in store. He declined the offer of a cup of tea and went straight to his room. He sat at the desk and sorted the notes he'd made during the meeting that had begun half an hour after his arrival. The first paper he addressed, however, was the typewritten document he'd received from a young major by the name of Stuckford, who was in charge of the operation. He smoothed out the paper, adjusted the desk lamp, and read the names. Kramer, Lehmann, Haider, Falkenrath, Grese. 12 in all, 3 women, 9 men. He studied the data on their weight and height and made a few more notes. It was a slow process. His professional pride required him to be absolutely meticulous. It was 1:30 by the time he put down his pen. Now he had it all sorted. He'd made his calculations and double-checked them. He had overlooked nothing. He checked again just to be certain. He got up from the desk, sat on his bed, and opened his suitcase. Although he never forgot anything, he checked to make sure everything was in place. He took out a clean shirt, closed the case, then washed in the cold water that was all the hotel had to offer. He never had any difficulty in dropping off to sleep. When they knocked at his door just after 5 a.m., he was already up and dressed. They had a light breakfast and then drove through the dark, drab town to the prison. McManaman was waiting for them. He was deathly pale, and Davenport wondered again whether he would be up to the job. Stuckford seemed to sense Davenport's misgivings, took him on one side, and told him that although McManaman might look shattered, he wouldn't let anybody down. By 11 a.m. everything was ready. Davenport had chosen to start with the women. Their cells were in the corridor closest to the gallows, and they could not have avoided hearing the trap door open. He wanted to spare them that. Davenport paid no mind to the crimes of the individual prisoners. It was his own sense of decency that made him start with the women. All those required to be present had taken up their positions. Davenport nodded to Stuckford, who signaled to one of the warders. Orders were barked, keys were rattled, a cell door opened. Davenport waited. The first to appear was Irma Grese. A fleeting sensation of surprise disturbed Davenport's icy calm. How could this slight, blonde 22-year-old possibly have whipped prisoners to death at the Belsen concentration camp? She was hardly more than a child. But when her sentence had been passed, no one had been in any doubt. She looked him in the eye, then glanced up at the gallows. The warders led her up the steps. Davenport adjusted her feet so that they were immediately above the trapdoor, and placed the noose round her neck while checking to make sure McManaman had made no mistake with the leather strap he was fastening.